With Season 1 being released recently, there are broken builds all over the place, and boy, do we have another one for you today. And no, we're not talking about a bone build, we're talking about a full-on shadow casting necromancer that's absolutely breaking Diablo 4 as of right now. The crazy thing is, they're even buffing this build even more in the next patch in just a little over a week. We're using Sever for upfront insane numbers paired with corpse explosions and Shadowblight for damn near impossible to compete with DPS. And I'm going to teach you how to do it right now. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, the full build for this will be in the description below over on Mobilytics, which has the best builds for Diablo 4 on the market. So if you want a full written quick cut of the build, head on over to the link and go ahead and copy that thing. Now, without wasting any more time, let's jump right into it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are in game right now, as you can see, and we have a lot to talk about when it comes to legendary aspects, affixes, you know, Paragon Board, everything you need to know and everything to give you to get this build up and running and rocking and rolling. Big shout out to Fixshun, clan member of mine. He is absolutely amazing. I saw this build and had to make a video on it. It was way too tempting. I've been asking him for weeks, and here we are. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, we have timestamps below, so if you want to skip all the mumbo jumbo and get right to what you need, go ahead and do it. Don't waste too much of your time. Let's get into it. Starting off with your helmet. When it comes to stat priority on your helmet, you're going to want to try to focus on defensive affixes as much as you can, whether it be on your helmet, your chest, your legs, or your amulet. You do want some sort of defenses on there, whether it be maximum health, total armor, damage from close, damage from distant. You want some sort of defense on there because the damage mitigation stats on there are very, very high. Kicking things off, though, as you can see with our helmet, we have cooldown reduction, a very strong stat, maximum health, as well as total armor. We also have the explosive miss legendary aspect, which allows us to actually trigger corpse explosions when we use our blood mist. And when we also detonate a corpse, the cooldown of blood mist is reduced by a good amount as well, which allows us to constantly be immune and constantly be dealing damage and not taking damage as well. So very, very strong right off the bat. Moving on from that, we go on to our chest piece. Of course, we're taking Disobedience. It's one of the strongest legendary aspects in the game for defense. Way too powerful to pass up on. We have up to 50% armor increase. Very, very strong. Once again, on the affixes, we're taking total armor. We're taking damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage, which is going to be a lot with this build. Maximum life. And then for a little bit of cheeky play here, we got darkness skill damage by 18%. Very, very strong. Generally, remember to focus on defense when it comes to your chest, your headpiece, your legs, as well as your amulet. Moving on, we're going on to our gloves. This is where things get kind of fun. Where on your affixes, you can focus on more offensive stats. For example, we have 4 ranks of Sever. Absolutely mandatory for this build since Sever is one of our primary damage dealers, as well as corpse explosion. So we have 4 ranks of Sever, 10% critical strike chance, which is going to be very important, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We have shadow damage over time effects, which is a lot of our damage as well, and some dexterity. You know, we're going to have to try to see if we can't roll that dexterity, but it's really there just to try to fill out the Paragon Board bonus stats if we need it. In print here, we have the Grasping Veins legendary aspect, which gives us 19% increased critical strike chance when you actually cast Corp Tendrils, and then you also deal bonus critical strike damage to enemies that were damaged by Corpse Tendrils. So not only does Corpse Tendrils bring them in, it stuns them and makes them vulnerable. Crowd control damage increase. You have the critical strike damage increase. It is absolutely mandatory. It is out of control. It's our big setup for the big, nasty, cheeky Sever and Shadowblight AoE damage combos. It is very, very strong. Grasping Veins on your gloves, very effective. Moving on to our pants. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to try to focus on more defensive stats here. Shielding Storm, which is super, super strong. And we're also taking maximum life, 1,000 maximum life. Damage reduction from close enemies. 4 ranks of Corpse Explosion, which is one of our top damage dealers, as well as our Sever. And then total armor. Moving down, we can see that each time that Bone Storm actually deals damage, we get a barrier equal to 5% of our life. So that's actually going to be ticking like a crazy amount because you're hitting 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 enemies at one time, and you're constantly getting barrier nonstop. Remember, on your legs, defensive stats over everything. Kind of mandatory in a way because these affixes as well as the extra unique effect on it is super strong for this build. We have the Greaves of the Empty Tomb. It gives us S's cost reduction, which is fantastic. Lucky hit chance with shadow damage, which is going to be huge for proccing a lot of our effects, which we'll talk about once we get to the talent tree. Damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time. 3 max evade charges, really solid boots, but we really like this because when we cast our Sever, creates a desecrated ground underneath the target as the Sever goes to the location, which can proc our Shadowblight key passive, which is a lot of our damage. Very, very solid boots. Greaves of the Empty Tomb, very, very strong. If you can get these, rock them and roll them. Moving on now to our offhand, we have the Runic Orb of Decay legendary aspect. Each time Shadowblight key passive deals damage, it can stack up and just ramp up to absolutely ludicrous numbers, stacking up to 5 times. As you can see here, each time the Shadowblight key passive deal damage to enemies, the next Shadowblight's damage within 10 seconds by 36%, stacking up to 5 times. It can get absolutely out of control. Incredibly strong legendary aspect to have, and it's absolutely mandatory for this build. Essence cost reduction on your offhand as well. Cooldown reduction, resource generation, all generally strong affixes. By the way, don't forget, if you want the build link to this and below, check out the Mobalytics link. You get literally everything A to Z to follow it. Very straightforward. Moving along now to our ring. This is where things get kind of cheeky when it comes to Season 1 content and, you know, playing that Necromancer the way you need to play it now. But for right now, let's talk about the legendary aspects. We'll go into the Malignant Hearts in a second. We have the Ultimate Shadow legendary aspect, which makes our Bone Storm actually turn into a darkness spell. The damage on it increased. Isn't really anything special, but it can proc our Shadowblight effect once again. On our rings, we're looking for offensive talents, critical strike chance, damage over time, critical strike damage, damage to crowd-controlled enemies. These are all generally very good talents to have, especially critical strike with how much damage and amplifiers we're actually going to be doing with that. So very, very effective as well. Moving on to our next ring, we are actually going to be grabbing the Blood-Soaked Ring, which allows our Blood Mist to leave a trail for 4 seconds, deals shadow damage per second to enemies who stand in it. The damage isn't very good, but once again, it procs our Shadowblight key passive. Very, very effective. Once again, critical strike chance, damage over time, vulnerable damage, damage to distant, critical strike damage, all those sorts of talents you want on your rings. If you can get maximum life on your rings as well, go for it. It makes you a lot tankier. Very, very strong also. And then lastly, for our amulet, we get the Blighted Chain. You deal 180% increased damage for 6 seconds after the Shadowblight key passive damages enemies 10 times. This is where you get the big money damage right here. Having this on your amulet is absolutely ludicrous damage. 180% increase in damage for 6 seconds, which you can have up constantly if you're hitting enough mobs. Where once again, we're going to try to grab damage reduction as well as overall damage, cooldown reduction, stuff like that. This amulet is absolutely insane, and it's very mandatory for this build to get it rocking and rolling to really destroy mobs in the end game. It is super, super powerful. That's why we're hitting for millions of damage sometimes with our attacks. Insane damage. Make sure you get the Blighted legendary aspect. Super powerful. Now we're going to be talking about the Malignant Hearts. First up, we have the Brutal Heart, where when at least one enemies are near you, you gain an aura that automatically curses surrounding enemies with Decrypify. So pretty much casting your Decrypify, which lowers all of your cooldowns, reduces the damage the enemies deal, slows them down, crowd controls them. So powerful for just automatically casting things, and you don't have to stress or worry about it. It is a very good heart to have. Obviously, right here, we have the Barber Heart, where critical strikes and all damage after that within 2.9 seconds is then absorbed by the target. It absorbs, explodes, it's out of control damage. If you can get it, or if you have it, or if you're lucky enough to have it, put that bad boy on. It's almost useful for every single build out there. Very, very strong. We do have another option right on screen here, so if you can have this option as well, it's a very good one as well. Lastly, we have the Vicious Heart, where it's mandatory for every Necromancer build at this point. We're walking near a corpse, automatically activates an equipped corpse skill every second, dealing 26% damage. There's a lot really going well for the Necromancer this season when it comes to the Malignant Hearts. And I don't see this ever being changed out of any Necromancer build out there. You go in your Blood Mist and you're automatically casting Corpse Explosions as well as Corpse Tendrils, bringing targets in, setting up Big Burst. It is way too powerful to pass up on, so you're casting all your corpse skills automatically, and then you're also casting your Decrypify automatically. So all you have to focus on is surviving and dealing damage with your Sever, and you're just rocking and rolling. It's a very straightforward build. Now let's get on to the talents. First up, when it comes to the Book of the Dead, you are going to be sacrificing your Skeletal Warrior Skirmishers. You are not using any pets for this build, obviously, for the critical strike chance. You're getting rid of the Skeletal Cold Mages for the 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and then you're also going the Iron Golem sacrifice for 30% increase critical strike damage as well. Don't forget Mobalytics link. You get all this information broken down for you to just copy paste a Reno, slap that bad boy in there, and you'll be good. Moving on now to the skill tree. First up with our basic skill, we are going to be taking Reap for the damage reduction, as well as attack speed bonus if an enemy dies within 2 seconds if they were recently hit by Reap. You don't need to add any more skill points because there are a lot more better options down the line, which we're going to need those skill points for. Obviously, number one, we are going to be going 5 out of 5 with our Sever, as well as Sever damages enemies along the line for 40% of its initial damage. Super strong stuff. And then we're also grabbing Hued Flesh, which is lucky hit, by the way. That's why you need a lot of lucky hit chance. Your damage has a 12% chance to create a corpse. We're going to be constantly using corpses with our corpse explosion and our corpse tendrils. So having as many corpses as you possibly can is going to be very valuable, as well as proccing some of our Paragon Board legendary nodes as well. Moving along, we do have 5 out of 5 Blood Mist. The reason for that is the cooldown reduction on it as much as we can have it. And then we're going to be grabbing Enhanced Blood Mist as well as Ghastly Blood Mist for summoning those corpses every second within Blood Mist. So the more we cast Blood Mist, the more corpses we summon, and then we get lower cooldown reduction on it, and then we're just casting everything and dealing damage while being invulnerable. Super effective. After that, we're going 5 out of 5 Corpse Explosion, obviously grabbing Enhanced, as well as the Blighted Corpse Explosion to help proc our Shadowblight passive by turning it into a Darkness skill, dealing damage over time. We're going to grab 1 out of Grim Harvest and 3 out of 3 in Fueled Death, where 9% damage increase for 5 seconds after we consume a corpse, which is pretty much just going to be up 24/7 by our Malignant Heart casting all of our corpses for us. Moving on to where things get kind of juicy for this build, where we're able to spam so much, is we're going to be grabbing Decrypify, which slows enemies and makes them deal less damage as well. We're also going to be grabbing Enhanced Cripify, which enemies hit while afflicted with Decrypify have a 10% chance to be stunned, so they can be crowd controlled, as well as enemies hit while afflicted with Decrypify have a 50% chance to reduce your active cooldowns. This allows us to toss out a Decrypify, go into our normal rotation of activating Bone Storm, going into Blood Mist, and then dealing all of our AoE damage and getting that lucky hit procced constantly, so we can get all of our cooldowns back up instantly and just keep on spamming our skills over and over and have zero downtime. On top of it, we're going to have 12% increased damage to cursed enemies, and then we have Death's Embrace, which close enemies take 6% more damage from you and 9% less damage to you. Generally, very good stuff. We're taking 1 point into Corpse Tendrils, and we're also going to grab Plagued Corpse Tendrils for when they're dragged in, they're also applied vulnerability. This is where our main source of vulnerability is applied, so we can amplify our damage by a lot. We're going to grab 1 into Reaper's Pursuit, and then Gloom is where we get some extra big damage as well. When enemies are hit by your Darkness skills, they take 6% increased shadow damage, stacking up to 3 times, which is pretty much going to be 24/7 when it comes to your Sever, when it comes to your shadow damage over time effects, your Corpse Explosion, your Bone Storm. All of these effects are going to add up, and it's literally just going to have 24/7 Gloom procced on them, 18% damage effect on there. We have Terror. Darkness skills deal 9% bonus damage to enemies who are slowed, which is going to proc off of our Decrypify, and then 9% bonus damage to enemies who are stunned, which can proc off of our Decrypify. So adding both these together, as well as the Corpse Tendril Stun, you're dealing so much damage, man. It's absolutely out of control. Moving on, obviously we don't have any minions. We're grabbing Standalone as well as Memento Mori. Sacrifices increase, bonuses, damage reduction, all that's very good stuff. We're grabbing Bone Storm for the damage over time, and we're going to turn it into a Darkness skill to proc more of our Shadowblight, and then we're getting damage reduction, as well as our critical strike chance being increased with Bone Storm active as well. Lastly, of course, we're taking Shadowblight. This is the absolute money machine of this build. Shadow damage infects enemies with Shadowblight, where we deal 10% bonus damage to enemies afflicted by it. Every 10th time an enemy receives shadow damage from you and your minions, while they're affected with Shadowblight, they take an additional 22% shadow damage. This ramps up to just absolutely insane numbers. It doesn't matter how much health they have. It could just ramp up over time and just get absolutely insane when it paired with your, legendary effects like your Blighted aspect, as well as your aspect of Decay. You're just dealing so much damage, man. It's absolutely out of control. So overall, this is the skill tree. Very straightforward. Remember, hit that Mobalytics link. You can literally copy this A to Z, get it all down, and rock and roll from there. After that, now we're going to move on to the Paragon board really quickly. Okay, so starting things off, obviously, we have our board. We're going to move up to the right here, grab our damage increasing talents, and then we're going to move on up into our glyph, which we're going to socket with Exploit. Obviously, Exploit is one of the best glyphs out there for almost every build in the game. It gets out of control once you get this glyph leveled up. Dealing damage to vulnerable enemies increases your damage overall for 6 seconds, stacking up to 10 times. Very, very strong. We're going to grab some of the defensive talents here as well as the offensive talents and move on up to the Wither board, and we're going to place the Glyph of Control in there. Glyph of Control is so strong early on. The damage multiplier is super easy to obtain, and it gets ramped up so high very easily. This also is applied, the additional bonus to damage to slowed enemies, which is applied by our Decrypify as well. So getting this up and running is very strong for the Necromancer. We're going to move on up to the right here. We're going to grab our rare node for the shadow damage increase all over here. Grab our glyph. Move up to the left, and then you can grab all these shadow damage increase nodes as well. You have the damage to elites enemies up here, as well as more shadow damage, and then you have some more defense from damage reduction from enemies affected by shadow damage over time skills up here. And then lastly, we're going to obviously grab Wither for our legendary node. Your shadow damage over time effects have a 5% chance to deal 50% bonus damage each time they deal damage, and bonus is increased by 2.5% for each 50 willpower we have. Super strong stuff. One of the best legendary aspects for Necromancer, even overall. After that, we're going to go on to the right here and go to the Flesh Eater board, and we're going to activate the Territorial Glyph. You deal increased damage to close targets. You also gain 10% damage reduction against close enemies as well, which we are going to be generally very close, pretty much 24/7 with our Blood Mist, activating all of our damage over time effects, Severs, Bone Storms, all of that stuff. So we're going to be generally very close. Getting that damage increase and damage reduction is going to be very important. We're going to move down here, grab our increased critical strike damage as well, damage to injured enemies to finish them off, as well as the rare node. Lastly, before we leave this board though, we are going to be grabbing the Flesh Eater. Consuming 5 corpses grants 40% increased damage, which this is going to happen 24/7, and you can have this theoretically up all the time because you're casting and consuming corpses every half second to a second if you're even micromanaging it yourself. So you can have this up 24/7 if you actually focus on it. We're also going to grab the damage to elites as well here, which is very strong. Move on south, get off this board. We're going to go to the last board, which is the Scent of Death, and it's going to have the Sacrificial Glyph a part of it as well. With at least 2 corpses nearby, you gain 15% damage reduction. With no corpses, you deal 15% increased damage. So this is going to happen a lot as well as you're killing enemies moving along. So then we have damage to healthy enemies to really kick off that fight and really deal a lot of damage instantly. Critical strike damage, which is very mandatory for this build. All generally very good rare nodes. The Necromancer overall has such a phenomenal Paragon board. Remember, this is all linked in the description below, Mobalytics link. Check it out. You can literally copy it A to Z, man, and just go through it your complete self. You don't have to listen to me talk the whole time. Now, without wasting any more time, I want to show you all the gameplay showcase, the rotation, and how it's done in-game. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are in-game right now. I just want to quickly go through some gameplay rotation as well as a preview of what this build can actually do in action and sort of break down the combat encounter for you. Now, when it comes to the general rotation of this build, it's actually fairly straightforward. A lot of your damage is going to be from passively dealing damage over time or auto-casted corpse explosions, as well as your damage from your AoE with your Bone Storm, all proccing Shadowblight. So all of your abilities and all your passes are going to be based around building that Shadowblight proc and just absolutely annihilating people with it, including your big Sever damage. So your rotation is going to generally go as follows. Before you engage in a group of enemies with about 3 to 4 elites at a time, you're going to pop your Bone Storm, use your Decrypify on as much of them as you possibly can to reduce the damage they deal, as well as crowd control them, and allow you to get lucky hits to reduce the cooldown on all your abilities. Go into your Blood Mist, and then you'll passively just start casting corpse abilities around those targets. And usually what happens is you'll cast your Corpse Tendril. Your Corpse Tendril will suck them all into an area, and by that time, you'll be leaving your Blood Mist, and then you will be spamming your Sever ability pretty much as you can until they actually die. And within just a matter of a couple seconds, everything usually dies by then. Let's roll down the clips and sort of break down this gameplay. So he goes in, he casts his Curse, goes into his Blood Mist. Here it goes to Corpse Tendril, and one Sever, and it gets a crit, and we're absolutely annihilating people. Once again, we have our Bone Storm active, Decrypify, we go into our Blood Mist, Corpse Tendril combo, and everything seems to just be dead. We pick up that Greed Shrine for the extra dollars. We got 4 or 5 elites right here, and they're just dead in a matter of seconds with applying all the debuffs on them, as well as proccing the Shadowblights, the tons of pools of shadow damage at once. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you can see right here, he's level 76. I'm not sure if you guys can see that. He's level 76, and these mobs are level 92, so they're 16 levels ahead of him. It's not exactly a walk through the park for a lot of builds or classes out there, but, you know, he's doing it with absolute ease at level 76. Getting some Reaps off to increase his attack speed. Once again, his basic rotation of Blood Mist, get his corpses automatically casted, and then big Sever damage for the big, chunky critical hits. Guys, as you can see, the build is very straightforward. It's nothing too crazy here, but what it does, and what it does well, is super effective. I mean, look at this pull. We're talking about 5, 6, 7 elites, suppressor mobs, cold enchanted mobs, dying in seconds. Like, I don't know. Am I crazy here? Is there something I'm missing? Would they have a leader in the group as well, so all their damage is being reduced, but he's invulnerable. Before they even get a chance to react, they're stunned and dead. Absolutely insanity, man. Absolutely insanity. And just to like show you in a quick slow motion fashion, you have a bunch of static lance enemies as well, grouping them all up perfectly for that gorgeous Sever, with all of your other shadow damage over time effects active. And just remember, this isn't with the Barber Wrathful Heart. This is just to show you that this build is incredibly effective without it, and it is not mandatory to have that at all. We do have a clip coming up right now showing you with the Barber Heart, with a boss encounter, showing you the kind of crazy single target damage you can deal. The first tick right here does 822,000, which is pretty good. But then the second tick, as you can see, just did 2 million damage in one shot. We're going to slow it down for you so you can check it out. We're going to pause it right at the perfect time. 2 million damage in one hit, absolutely one-shotting this monster and just annihilating this nightmare dungeon. This build is absolutely crazy. And I want to shout out to Fixshun, one of our awesome clan members and community members, for showing me this build. It was awesome making this build guide for it. I appreciate all love and support from you, ladies and gentlemen. Until the very end, my name is Sky from the Comeback Kids. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace!